Manila, Philippines, a city where the pulse of daily life is set to the rhythm of countless conversations, many of them in English. Here, English is not just a subject in school or a language for business. It's woven into the fabric of everyday life, from bustling markets to lively family gatherings. For decades, however, a quiet verdict has been passed on the Philippines, an unspoken judgment that Filipinos do not speak real English but rather a flawed version. This idea, repeated in boardrooms, classrooms, and even in the media, became an unchallenged truth for many. Filipinos speak a so-called broken Carabao English, a version seen as less than or somehow inferior. The myth grew from a rigid belief that only the Queen's English or general American was authentic and anything else was simply incorrect. This narrow view ignored the rich diversity of Englishes spoken around the world. Filipino call center agents, for example, were praised for their ability to mimic Western accents, yet often mocked for their unique idioms and expressions. Comedians would exaggerate their speech for laughs, reinforcing stereotypes and making many feel self-conscious. Online, Filipino English was frequently labeled as simply wrong, with social media users quick to point out supposed mistakes. Even well-meaning foreign educators arrived in the country determined to fix what they saw as errors, rather than appreciating the local flavor and creativity of Filipino English. The paradox is striking. The Philippines is one of the world's largest English-speaking nations, with millions fluent in the language, yet its people are constantly told their English is flawed, never quite good enough. This narrative fostered a deep sense of language insecurity. Filipinos became hyper-aware of their accents, hesitant to speak up in public, and taught to aspire to a foreign standard that often felt out of reach. Many began to doubt their own abilities, even when they were perfectly understandable. The idea that their English was a deficiency became a heavy burden, shaping self-esteem and limiting opportunities for self-expression. It was a weight carried silently by generations, but soon, this burden would be challenged by one of the very experts who helped define proper English. A new perspective was about to emerge, one that would question everything Filipinos had been told about their language, and perhaps help them reclaim their voice. Professor Andrew Whitmore, a renowned linguist at Harvard, was the very embodiment of prescriptivism. For him, English was not just a language, but a system of rules, strict, inviolable, and sacred. Any deviation, no matter how small, was a sign of linguistic decay, a step away from the purity he believed the language deserved. In his controversial book, The Fraying of a Global Tongue, Whitmore didn't mince words. He described Filipino English as a disordered pigeon, a chaotic blend that, in his view, only pretended to be real English. He saw it as a patchwork of borrowed phrases and local quirks, lacking the structure and discipline he so admired. Whitmore argued that this so-called English was more than just a curiosity, it was a genuine barrier to global communication. His harsh critique gave ammunition to those who already looked down on Filipino speakers, reinforcing stereotypes and justifying the biases they faced in international business and academia. Yet, for all his expertise, Whitmore's understanding was built entirely on academic papers, audio recordings, and secondhand accounts. He had never actually set foot in the Philippines, never experienced the language in its living, breathing context. He dismissed Taglish, the fluid switching between English and Tagalog, as nothing more than a linguistic crutch, a sign that Filipinos had failed to master either language fully. To him, this code switching was evidence of confusion, not creativity. In his lectures, Whitmore would often single out Filipino idioms as prime examples of distortion. He'd sigh at phrases like, "for a while" used to mean "please wait," shaking his head at what he saw as a corruption of English's clarity. To Whitmore, Filipino English was a broken bridge, an incomplete connection between cultures, unable to bear the weight of true communication. Now, for the first time, he was preparing to travel to Manila to deliver a keynote address. He was eager, even excited, to enlighten local academics about what he saw as the shortcomings of their English. Whitmore was confident, perhaps even a little smug, in his assessment. He believed his years of research and his prestigious position gave him the authority to judge. After all, he was the expert, the one with the credentials and the published works. But as he stepped into the vibrant, unpredictable streets of Manila, reality was about to challenge everything he thought he knew about language, culture, and communication. Professor Whitmore's reality check began the moment he landed in Manila. The city's energy was palpable, a vibrant mix of cultures and languages swirling around him as he stepped into the humid air. He had read about the Philippines' linguistic diversity, but nothing had prepared him for the immediacy of hearing it in action. The taxi driver greeted him warmly, speaking fluid, vivid English, imperfect by textbook standards, but never unclear. Whitmore was surprised by the driver's confidence, the way he navigated between English and Tagalog, sometimes blending the two seamlessly. The driver's storytelling was alive, not a translation, but a direct expression in his own English. He shared tales of Manila's traffic, his family, and even offered advice on the best local food, all with a natural ease that made Whitmore feel instantly welcome. At his hotel, staff spoke polished, articulate English, their warmth and hospitality shining through. Each interaction felt genuine, as if language was not just a tool, but a bridge to understanding and connection. Later, a waitress with a slight American accent chatted with him about the language conference. She was curious about his research, and her questions revealed a deep awareness of how language shaped her own identity. "Language is like halo, she said. All mixed up, but that's what makes it delicious." Her words lingered with Whitmore, capturing the essence of what he was beginning to witness. Whitmore was struck by the analogy. It was a simple yet profound way to describe the living, evolving nature of English in the Philippines, a language shaped by history, necessity, and creativity. English here wasn't broken. It was dynamic, personal, and deeply rooted in daily life. In every market stall, on every street corner, he heard English used with confidence and flair, adapted to fit the needs of its speakers. The language was a tool for connection, not just transaction. It brought people together, allowing them to share stories, laughter, and even moments of vulnerability. He realized he was witnessing something far richer than the data he'd studied. The living language of Manila was not just a subject for analysis, but a vibrant, ever-changing reality. The myth of broken English was already starting to unravel. Whitmore saw that what some called mistakes were actually signs of adaptation and resilience, and he was only just beginning to listen. The city's voices promised more lessons, if only he kept his mind and ears open. Determined to see beyond hotel politeness, Whitmore explored a local market. He expected English to vanish, but vendors negotiated and joked in rapid, adaptable English. With locals, they code-switched. With tourists, they simplified. English was a practical, multilingual dance. A vendor's offhand comment, "Maybe he needs more sweet things in his life," was both astute and perfectly delivered. In San Agustin Church, he heard prayers in English, intimate, emotional, and authentic. This was not colonial language, but the language of the soul. The prayers weren't flawless, but they were powerful. For these Filipinos, English was not foreign. It was part of their identity. Whitmore realized English here was not just spoken, it was lived. The language was in their hearts, not just their heads. His academic lens had never shown him this. At the International Linguistics Conference, Whitmore listened as Dr. Elena Reyes presented The Evolution of Philippine English, a Story of Ownership. She argued Filipino English had its own grammar, vocabulary, and style, not errors, but innovations. "We made it our own. It wears a barong, not a tuxedo," she said, earning applause. Marco, a young PhD candidate, challenged Whitmore directly. "You judge us by a standard that doesn't fit our reality." He called Taglish a sophisticated code switching, a third space of communication. Whitmore, expecting to educate, found himself being educated. These were not defensive apologies, but passionate, rigorous arguments. The speakers celebrated their English, defending their identity with grace and intelligence. They were not seeking approval, they were peers, dismantling his long-held beliefs. Whitmore felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The myth of linguistic inferiority was being dismantled word by word. He was no longer certain of anything. That evening, Whitmore skipped the conference dinner. Wandering Manila's streets, his perspective transformed. He watched families' children blending English and Tagalog in laughter and play. He'd called this language broken, but saw now it was whole, woven into daily life, expressing joy and affection. His academic framework had no room for this living evidence. He felt shame for judging a nation's speech without ever listening to its people. His planned keynote on global standards now felt profoundly wrong. He realized he'd sought conformity, not communication, errors, not expression. Filipinos weren't failing to speak his English, they were brilliantly speaking their own. It was a valid world English with its own soul. The humility of this realization was overwhelming. The question now, what would he do about it? The day before his keynote, Whitmore visited a public school with Dr. Reyes. In a fourth-grade classroom, children greeted him with bright, fearless English. Their stories about beaches, pets, and family were simple, creative, and evocative. They mixed English and Tagalog naturally, not as a crutch, but to add color and meaning. Whitmore saw no disorder, only intuitive, joyful bilingualism. These children embodied the halo English, vibrant, mixed, and uniquely theirs. At the end, a quiet girl asked, "Is our English okay?" The question struck him deeply. It was the question of a nation. He knelt, meeting her eyes. "Your English is wonderful. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." In that moment, he was no longer a critic, but a convert. He understood. English in the Philippines was not broken. It was beautiful. The future belonged to these fearless voices, and he was ready to listen. Months later at Harvard, Professor Whitmore stood before a packed auditorium. The title of his lecture, "On Being Wrong, How the Philippines Taught Me the True Meaning of a World English." He told stories of the taxi driver, the market vendor, Dr. Reyes, Marco, and the Manila children. He confessed his arrogance and retracted his chapter on the Philippines, calling it misinformed and unjust. Filipino English is not derivative but co-equal, a world-class, dynamic variety of global English. They have not broken English. They have owned it. They have enriched it. He apologized to the teachers, students, and everyday speakers of the Philippines. "I was wrong," he said simply. The students rose in thunderous applause. It was the end of a lecture, but the beginning of a new understanding. The world was listening. Whitmore's confession became a global news event, the video going viral and shifting perceptions overnight. Headlines now celebrated Filipino English as world-class. In the Philippines, the video played everywhere: schools, offices, news broadcasts. "Our English is beautiful" became a national mantra, replacing insecurity with pride. International companies and educators began to recognize Philippine English as a legitimate dialect. Filipino writers and creators felt emboldened, using their voices with new authenticity. The gentle rebellion Whitmore witnessed became a revolution of self-esteem. This was not just one man's change of heart, it was the power of listening. Language is defined by those who live it, not by foreign experts. The world now sees Filipino English is not broken. It is uniquely, powerfully, beautifully Filipino.